Okay, our graphing series continue. Uh, if you were looking to learn how to graph linear functions from scratch, you would have viewed a video on how to plot points in a rectangular coordinate system. You might have just looked at a video on how to find the slope given 2 points and applying a formula. Now I'm going to do a video on finding x and y intercepts. Finding x and y intercepts. Now it's important to understand what intercepts are. Intercepts are actually the point of intersection between for a line, the point of intersection for a line, right? So let's say I have a line that looks like this, okay? And the point of intersection is basically the point where the line crosses the y-axis, which will be called the y-intercept, right? So this is the point where line crosses or intersects the y-axis, which is called the y-intercept. And then you guessed it right for the next point, right? Next point, which would be right here. It's the point where the line crosses the x-intercept. And that's called the the x-axis, apologies. And that's called the x-intercept. Okay. Alrighty. So you're going to find out that this point here, meaning that y is actually 0. So x will have some value a and y would be 0 because I'm going to have to move a direction and then stay put, right? For 0, y 0, it can't go anywhere. And then for the y-intercept, you're going to see here that x was actually 0, right? Because it started from the origin, x is 0, and y was some value b, right? X, y, x, y. So a nice little trick to know is basically the x-intercept is when we have y as a 0 point, right? And for the y-intercept is when we have x as a 0, right? Or another way you can look at it, for the x-intercept, x will have a value, and for the y-intercept, y will have a value. So how that works is you'll be presented with an equation. Let's say the equation will be equal, usually in a general form. So there are two forms you're going to be presented with an equation. So two forms of equation. You're going to have the y-intercept form. I'm sorry, the slope-intercept form, right? Remember, I identified earlier that m is considered the slope. And in this formula here, b is the y-intercept when x equals 0, as we mentioned here. See that? Right? So if we were to find the y-intercept in this equation, we just have to set x equal to 0, and then we'll get b, and then we'll know that what the value of b is. All right, so you'll see an equation in this form that might ask you to find both intercepts, or you will see it in this form. This is called the general form. This is called the general form. Right? All your equations of the line would usually end up in this form. So what will happen is once it's presented to you in the general form, eventually you'll have to solve for y to make it look like y equal mx plus b, because y is your line and you're trying to graph your line. And when graphing the line, you usually would have to identify your slope and some point, and one of those points could be your y-intercept. All right, so let's get into first finding x and y intercepts, finding x and y intercepts. So how I like to do with this, I like to set up a table. I like to advise students to set up a table. Of course, you're going to be given an equation before you're asked to find the intercepts. So I like to set up a table where I have my x value and my y value, right? And what I know about intercepts, if I'm finding my x-intercept, what I said about my x-intercept, x will have some value and y would be 0. We don't know what that value is yet because we haven't been given an equation, but we know y is 0, right? And to find my y-intercept, notice how I denote it with an x and a dash and a y and a dash. I know that my x will be 0 and my y will be some type of value, all right? So let's say, for example, I asked to find the x and y intercept of equation y equal to 2x plus 4, right? So in one table, it says let y equal to 0. So you have to perform two operations in which you will evaluate these equations for given values of zeros for either x or y, depending on which intercept you're looking for. So in this case, I'm just going to, just choose the first. I'm going to look for my x-intercept. That means I'm going to make y equals 0 and solve for x. So here my y is 0. And I'm going to solve for x. So of course, I'm going to subtract both sides by 4 to get rid of my term. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 2, the opposite operation, to get rid of my factor that's affecting x from being by itself. So now I have a value of x. So here is where I find my a. So I found my value for x. So my x is 2, negative 2. So my my x-intercept is negative 2, 0. Okay. Now I'm going to find my my y-intercept by performing the same evaluation of this equation. And this time it says that x is 0. So I'm going to plug in, substitute my value of x for 0. And you see that my term 2 times 0 cancels out because anything times 0 is 0 and y is just equal to 4. So now I have a value for my y. So my y-intercept is when x is 0, y is 4. And that's how you find the intercepts, basically. You just substitute zeros for y, solve for x for your x-intercept, then substitute 0 for x, solve for y for your y-intercept. Let's do another one. So let's say I have 2x plus 4y equals to, let's say, just 1. Okay? Keep it nice and simple. So again, I'll set up my table. With my x and y value, I know that 1 will be 0, the y will be 0 for the x-intercept, and the x will be 0 for the y-intercept. So let me find my value for y, for x, and my value for y, right? My a and my b. So here we go. I'm going to say y is 0, right? I'm using my first formula there. So, of course, this cancels out. I'm left with 2x equal to 1. I'm solving for x, as you can see, by performing the opposite operation. So x is a half. So my x-intercept is when x is a half, y is 0. Now let's find my y-intercept. So using the same equation, now this time x is 0, right? X is 0. So of course that zeroes out. And I'll divide both sides by 4. Opposite operation, y is equal to 1/4. So for my y-intercept, it says that when x is 0, y is 1/4. Why do I have negative a half here? It's a half, right? Yep. All right. And that's it for finding x and y intercept, guys. Again, it can be presented in your equation might look like the slope intercept equation, or it might look like an equation in general form. And really all you have to do is to set up a table where one of your point y will be 0, the other point x will be 0. Plug in these 0 values into the equation and solve for the remaining variable, and you will get your coordinate system. All right, so that's it, guys, for finding x and y intercept. And you will see that this is one of the ways in which you graph the equation of a line on a rectangular coordinate system by just finding the intercepts and plotting the 2 points and then connecting the dots to get your line. Okay, you know how to reach me if you have any questions.